Back in 2007, when I first came across Sigma Team and their Alien Shooter series, I was completely and utterly captivated by it. I was getting tired of games taking themselves too seriously, and Alien Shooter offered that completely over-the-top adrenaline-filled bloodbath action I craved so much, and what was missing from the industry at the time. I've played both it and its sequel countless times over the years, and likely will continue to do so for years to come. However, as time went on, the quality of Sigma Team's shooter series quickly went downhill. Zombie Shooter, while fun, was uninspired and more or less a copy and paste of the first Alien Shooter. Zombie Shooter 2, the same but with a ton of bugs and a major lack of polish. And then Alien Shooter Conscription was just a complete disaster altogether. Since then, the shooter series has been almost non-existent. The only life it has been given is a mobile version called Alien Shooter Lost City in 2016, and a tower defense adaptation in 2018. I was beginning to wonder whether Sigma Team would ever return to the series for PC, but in January 2020, they finally released a new entry in the series. I was skeptical, and a part of me was expecting yet another unbalanced and unpolished mess. Regardless of that, the fan in me just had to check it out. The questions that remain are, have Sigma Team redeemed themselves with this latest entry, or is this just another disaster to add to the growing list for the series? Alien Shooter 2 The Legend is a top-down shooter developed and published by Russian indie developer Sigma Team. It is a follow-up to the 2007 release Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance. It initially released on mobile devices December 10, 2019, but received a PC release on Steam January 22, 2020. It is priced at €12.49. Alien Shooter 2 The Legend has had the gameplay completely reworked, creating a very different take on the Alien Shooter formula. This new take adds to the game in many ways, but it also detriments too, where returning players may have difficulty enjoying themselves for the first 6 to 8 hours. Progress has been made with this entry, and it is a step in the right direction for the series, but it is a case of 1 step forward and 2 steps back. In Alien Shooter 2 The Legend, you take on the role of an unnamed mercenary who's been called in to help with a mission by General Baker. The mercenary is renowned among his peers, who see him as a living legend. Your mission is to assist General Baker in stopping whatever is going on in the Magma Energy Corporation base, and find the source of the alien invasion that has occurred. What you find, however, is that the invasion on the base is only just the beginning. Together with Baker and the rest of his team, you must piece together what happened, who was responsible, and stop the invasion before the entirety of mankind is lost. But when working under such shady circumstances, who can you trust, and is everyone who they say they are? Like with Zombie Shooter 2, the plot of Alien Shooter 2 The Legend is largely the same as that of Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance. There has been several small changes to the plot, along with a few additional characters added in, most being new squad leaders such as the Major. One of the main characters has also had their roles changed a small bit too. In its entirety, however, returning players will have a hard time finding anything new or interesting with the plot. It's mostly the same cast and feels like you're being told the same story just with minor differences, probably for the 3rd or 4th time depending on how many Sigma Team's games you've played in the past. Newcomers to the series won't have this issue, making it a lot more enjoyable and easier to become intrigued, if they can forgive the poor translation from Russian to English. Veterans, however, will feel somewhat underwhelmed and exasperated. The plot does its job. It creates a setting, objective and reason for the protagonist to be there. The story in the shooter series has always been secondary, and here is no different. Regardless, I'm disappointed that Sigma Team once again used mostly the same plot as they did 13 years ago with Vengeance. I would have liked a different story, setting and characters for a change. Admittedly, there are differences, but they are too few with no real impact, but instead act more as filler than plot expansion, leaving a lot to be desired. Generally with an autopsy, this is where I'd move on to the gameplay, but with Alien Shooter 2 The Legend, we have an additional section that needs discussing, and that is the game's engine. Any fan of the Alien Shooter series will immediately identify that Alien Shooter 2 The Legend uses the same engine as Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance from back in 2007. The engine is now over 13 years old and has been used for I believe 11 games in total now, including this one. While it is an engine that runs very well with modern hardware, it is showing its age and limitations. Back in the day, Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance looked fantastic for a game from a small independent team of developers, with good lighting and fantastic attention to detail with the monsters' animations. But what was once beautiful in a bloodbath slaughterfest kind of way is now quite ugly, as the transition from old and low screen resolutions hasn't scaled so well with modern resolutions. It is very noticeable with some of the larger enemies. Human character animations, while adequate back in 2007 for a small development team, now have the movement of planks of wood. In fairness, however, the aliens animations do still hold up. But overall, the visuals and assets are now really starting to show their age, and it isn't pretty at all. Let's get to the real reason for the introduction of this section though. Due to the same engine being used, Alien Shooter 2 The Legend has the same issues and bugs that all of the previous games that used it had. Firstly is the dreaded environmental bugs, where it is quite easy for the player to get stuck in the environment and unable to get out. This results in the player having to start the level over from scratch. It is a bigger problem with The Legend compared to previous titles however, as with how it is designed, the player is punished for death with the loss of 10% of their money and the dropping of any items that they were carrying that wasn't equipped. This punishment also applies to restart of levels. While this issue doesn't occur very often, when it does, the player is being punished for something that isn't their fault, and is very frustrating and happened 2 or 3 times during play. Several other known issues have crossed over too, such as enemy counters not working right, resulting in you being unable to progress, enemies getting stuck in walls, and so on. A few new bugs have crept in too. In one instance, the turret on my car still provided knockback but dealt no damage to enemies. On the level where you drive the large tank, if you get out, sometimes the tank will rotate ever so slightly, and if you approach it to get back in, the game registers that you've been run over and instantly kills you. There have also been reports of equipped items disappearing and being lost among others. From a performance standpoint, it runs very well for the most part, but the engine is starting to struggle with more modern hardware. I found that the screen sometimes stutters as you move, but there are no frame rate drops while this is happening. This mostly occurs when you first load up the game. During loading times when booting up the game freezes for about 5 to 10 seconds. The first time I loaded up the game I thought it had crashed and was about to force close it, but it loads up the main menu afterwards. Of course, these are just the problems and bugs that I'm aware of. There may be more that affects different systems and hardware setups. Despite being functional and certainly running well for the most part, it is time for Sigma Team to move on with their engine. It is aging, becoming less and less appealing visually with each new release, and slowly but surely it is running worse and worse as hardware becomes more powerful. I know what you're probably thinking, why don't they just scrap the engine and use Unity or Unreal? The problem with Alien Shooter is that the engine is designed specifically for it, meaning it has particular coding and workings that likely wouldn't be possible with other engines. This is the reason Sigma Team's games can have so many enemies on screen all at once, while bullet casings and corpses remain, while not losing any frame rates per second, even on old machines. It is their engine and how it's designed. My knowledge of building a game engine from scratch is nothing more than 1, it is hard, and 2, it takes years. But there comes a point where a developer has to admit that their engine just isn't cut out for it anymore, and it's time to build a new one. Sigma Team reached that point over half a decade ago. If they are to continue to make progress and bring the Alien Shooter series forward, they need to build a new engine with new visuals, new assets, new and redesigned character models, and a whole new game. The Legend is a step forward in the right direction with their new take on gameplay, but there is only so far they can take a new formula with what they're using. If it is ever to progress to a point that it has the potential to, and ideally needs to be, a new engine needs to be developed. And until this happens, the shooter series is always going to be stuck where it is, no matter how many changes Sigma Team makes. The gameplay to Alien Shooter 2 The Legend has had quite a change compared to that of the original games. While previous installments were shooters with light RPG elements, The Legend is more of a looter shooter with character development being centered around the equipment as opposed to level stats and skills. The Legend also acts more like a campaign with far more levels across 4 acts as opposed to the usual 15 or so levels like Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance had. We'll start with the levels and the workings of the campaign. The game is separated into 4 acts or sectors as they're called here. Each act has a large number of levels that must be completed to progress to the next. Each level has its objectives that must be completed, along with 2 additional side objectives that can be accomplished to obtain extra money and of course achievements. Side objectives include the likes of destroying 10 crates, barrels or racks, killing a certain number of enemies with a particular weapon type, or completing the level without using an individual first aid, or finding all the secrets in a level. The reward for completing side objectives increases the further you progress in the game. The first act centers around the first Magma Corporation base, much like the start of Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance. The second takes place in the city, the third in ME2, and the final act is located around the aliens base. The player can return to any of the previous acts and their levels at any time they please, allowing them to go back and complete any side objectives they may have missed when they initially played them. There are 3 types of main objectives, the first being the main plot progression objectives that revolve around completing a particular task that is given. The second plays a lot more like the old survival mode, where you're placed in an arena where aliens continue to spawn in and you need to survive for a certain period, or collect a number of particular items that they drop at random. In some cases you may need to kill a certain amount of a particular type of alien. The third type acts like the gun stand modes, where you're in a turret or an NPC controlled tank and must kill all the aliens that attack you. The main plot progression objectives will be quite familiar to returning players. Some of them are the same as those from Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance. But other new objectives have also been added, giving at least some fresh content for veterans. But it does take some time before they begin to surface. The arena style objectives, while fun, giving brief survival mode nostalgia, act more as filler levels than anything else and are largely what make the game as long as it is. A good 1/3 if not a few more of the levels in an act revolve around this form of objective and level. There's no denying they're fun, but with there being so many of them, the novelty soon wears off and the realisation that they're nothing more than just playtime filler soon sets in. It doesn't take long before they cause more exasperation than anything else. The gun stand style levels are good fun where the enjoyment doesn't wear off with them as it does with the survival style missions, as they are few and far between. But it's also with these levels and the way the turret works that gives away the fact that the Legend was made for mobile devices over PC. The turret control is a bit wonky and not the most responsive to the mouse. But look past that drawback, they are quite enjoyable in true alien shooter fashion. Overall the levels have a good variety to them, where no one form of gameplay outweighs another. The occasional change from one type to another keeps things interesting and stops anyone from becoming boring, and the fact that you can go back and play any of the previous levels as you see fit is fantastic. The side objectives also give something extra to aim for with each of the levels, with the rewards being worth the effort, especially later in the game. However, returning players will be playing through a lot of content that is taken directly out of previous Sigma Team games, including Zombie Shooter 2. Most of the new content does revolve around the previously mentioned survival and gun stand style levels, so when it comes to plot, most of it, though not all, is the same as previous games. There is also no hiding the fact that there is a huge amount of filler levels. I'd even go as far as to say there is too many that makes the 25 to 30 hour campaign drag on a bit longer than it ideally needs to be. It has been great to have an alien shooter work as the campaign as opposed to just over a dozen levels or so, but I wish that I would have brought something entirely new as opposed to largely reused assets and content from previous games. It won't be a problem for those new to the series, but returning players may have difficulty getting drawn into the game, at least for the first while because of this. Then there is the equipment and character building in the game. With the RPG and level up systems thrown out the window, the general character development of the game and how a character works has been changed quite dramatically from previous games. The first big change you'll notice, at least at the start, is that your character moves at a much slower pace than they did in the original games. In the Legend, the heavier a piece of armour is and the more defense it provides, the more it weighs down your character, making them move at a slower pace. So you need to choose whether you want a faster moving character or a more tank style character. Weapons also affect your mobility too, with the heavier the weapon is, the slower your character can move, so they too need to be taken into consideration. There are of course implants, which I'll get into in more detail on shortly, that can increase the movement speed of your character. With the more advanced the implant is, the more it increases your speed. With these, by the time you reach the halfway point in the game, your character will be moving at the usual alien shooter pacing, but it takes time before you get there. The mobility of your character is an understandable change, but one that does alienate returning players for a good chunk of the game's playtime. It is this change more than anything that will catch returning players off guard, as you need to adjust your play under this change of movement speed. I found myself struggling to begin with, as the game just didn't feel like Alien Shooter. But later on you get implants that are so powerful and increase your speed so much that the mobility restriction is practically non-existent. It is then that the Legend starts to truly feel like an alien shooter game, and when you can start playing it as you do in previous games. But this, mixed with largely the same content from the previous games, makes the first 6 to 8 hours of the game quite painful to veterans, making it difficult to get absorbed into it. While it is a lot to ask players, if you can push past those first few hours, the Legend does start to play like an alien shooter title, and it is there where the true enjoyment of the game begins. Much like with the games of the action RPG genre, items are dropped by enemies at random upon killing them. There are also champion variations of normal enemies which are stronger and more powerful than their standard counterparts who drop more powerful equipment. Alternatively, equipment can be purchased from the shops found in each of the hub areas. The equipment types of the game are weapons, helmets, armour, drones and implants. There are also separate slots for grenades, medkits and batteries, which can be used at any time during play. Medkits being used to heal your character and batteries used to restore energy. Items come in a variety of different rarities that are displayed with a particular colour. Grey is a worn item, green is a standard item, yellow is specialised and purple is superior. Green and yellow offer better stats to an item such as increased defense for armour and helmets, and damage, blast radius and the likes for weapons and drones, along with bigger bonuses for implants. Purple, however, can add up to 3 modifiers to an item that grants additional bonuses along with the increased stats. The number of modifiers an item can have differs depending on the item type. Weapons can have up to 3 modifiers, while armour can have 2. Implants always have 2 modifiers, but the higher the rarity the more powerful those modifiers are. Helmets and drones, however, for some strange reason do not have any modifiers at all despite their rarity. There are also extremely powerful unique items to get your hands on too that is obtained through a method of crafting, but that is something I will get to a bit later. The types of modifiers that would be potentially applied to an item changes depending on the type of item it is. For example, weapons won't have the same modifiers as armor, and both weapons and armor won't have the same modifiers as that of implants, so each item type has its own possible modifiers. Weapon modifiers include ricochet, where bullets bounce off enemies possibly hitting others, the ability where a grenade is tossed upon the weapon being reloaded, extra damage over time being applied to bullets such as poison or fire. You can even have vampirism applied to weapons that very gradually, and I do mean very gradually, restores lost health. Armor modifiers include things like treasure hunter, where the amount of money found during missions is increased, and smile of fortune, that increases the drop rate of items from enemies. Implants can increase your overall health, speed or energy. Energy is needed to use your shoulder cannon, which I'll go into more depth on shortly. Modifiers can also be applied to implants, including paramedic, that increases the amount of health a medkit will restore, field medic, where medical cabinets restore more health than normal, and certain other abilities where you can move faster when health is full or deal more damage when your health drops below a certain threshold. Having the character development work like this results in the strength of your character being entirely dependent on your equipment loadout. Therefore, your only method of increasing your power is by finding equipment and buying it from the shop. This is a completely new take on the Alien Shooter series, and it's certainly interesting and puts a whole new spin on the workings of the game. A new spin that works very well and adds a layer of depth that the series needed while being very enjoyable in the process. The number of available modifiers is generous enough and fun to play around with, allowing you to make some pretty powerful modifier combinations between several different pieces of equipment. It is a system where you need to sit down and think about what pieces of equipment are best suited to your scenario and what modifiers work better with others. It is the complexity that the shooter series needed. I would have liked to have seen a few more, and the other equipment types like the drone and helmet not having modifiers at all are somewhat disappointing and bewildering. The fact that those were left out from the modifiers lowers the potential depth the mechanic could have had, lessening the number of possible combinations that you could make, which is disappointing. It is a system that has its depth and it is great to see and experience, but it isn't without its caveats. Along with your standard equipment, there is also the previously mentioned shoulder cannon. It is this special weapon that energy is required to use. You can unlock the shoulder cannon early in the game by completing a series of missions. It has two different attack modes, with one only being possible to have active at any one time, those being offensive mode and defensive mode. The offensive mode works in a more aggressive manner, sending a laser beam hurtling towards enemies, damaging them. The defensive mode activates a pulse that shoots outwards in a circle around the player, damaging and pushing back enemies that surround them. Each mode has its skill tree that has various power-ups and bonuses that can be applied to it, to make it even more powerful. For example, the offensive mode has a secondary fire that allows the player to fire a beam that sets the ground on fire, damaging and setting alight any enemies that come in contact with it. The primary fire can also have a bounce ability added to it, where upon hitting its intended target, the laser beam will bounce off it, hitting others nearby. The number of times it bounces depending on its level. To level up the skill trees, you need to obtain points, which are done through dismantling items in the shoulder cannon menu that is found at each hub area. Once you gain enough points from dismantling items, you will level up your shoulder cannon, allowing you to add a new power up to the mode of your choice, or level up a power up you've already unlocked. Each power up can be increased to a total of level 5. With each level up, the amount of points needed is increased. The number of points you obtain from one item is dependent on its power and rarity. The more powerful and rarer it is, the more points a single dismantling would give. I think it's safe to say that the idea of the shoulder cannon likely came from Doom Eternal, which itself came from Predator. It is more than a coincidence, but I guess if you need inspiration, you get it from the best. Other game inspiration aside, the shoulder cannon is a great addition, and one that is needed as the bigger and tougher enemies of the series have really been beefed up in this entry. It also adds an additional element along with depth to the combat too. As with limited energy, you need to choose when to use it and when to hold onto your energy and batteries. Indeed, energy regenerates slowly over time, but it is painfully slow, making it quite tactical as to when you should use a battery and when not to, all the while being great fun in the process. The fact that you need to dismantle items too adds a layer of complexity, as you need to choose between keeping equipment for yourself, selling it for money to buy better equipment, and then dismantling it for leveling up your cannon. Therefore, you need to keep a balance between your money, your equipment, and leveling up your cannon, which is great for the depth of the game. The downfall to the shoulder cannon is that as you level it up and unlock new power-ups and increase its overall power, it begins to become overpowered. At least that's the case with the offensive mode anyway. By the time I reached near the end of the game and had my offensive mode almost leveled up to the max, the laser beam was ripping through everything and anything. Even the biggest and toughest enemies the game has to offer, along with their more powerful champion counterparts. Nothing could withstand it. This in return resulted in no enemies that could present a challenge to me, as it would be eviscerated before it ever had a chance to pose any threat at all. This isn't so much the case in the early to mid stages of the game, but by the time you reach past the halfway mark, there isn't much that will challenge you anymore, resulting in a massive imbalance with game difficulty, something that has been Sigma Team's problem with the series for several titles now. Much like the character development of the game, the shoulder cannon is a step forward for the series but also 2 steps back. It is fun to use and level up with its workings, adding in more complexity and depth to the game as a whole, but the imbalance that it causes as its power increases destroys any challenge that the game throws at you, which is unfortunate, as the difficulty is just right at the early stages. As briefly mentioned earlier, there is a form of crafting system in the Legend, though it doesn't quite work how you would generally expect a crafting system to work. This is done through the converter that is found in each of the hub areas. How this works is that you place 3 items into the converter, which are then destroyed to make a new and different item. The more of one item type that you place into the converter, the higher the chance of getting that item type as your new item. For example, if you place 2 weapons into the converter, you will likely get a weapon back. Place 2 or more implants in, more often than not you'll get an implant. The rarity of the item you receive is also determined by the rarity of the 3 items that you place in. So if you place 3 superior items into the converter, there's a much higher chance of receiving a superior item in return. The same applies to all other rarities too. However, there is another purpose behind the converter, and that is to craft the previously mentioned unique weapons. These special and powerful weapons require a specific set of items of a certain rarity to be placed into the converter. If you get the combination right, you will receive a unique weapon. The recipe generally consists of 1 superior item, 1 specialized item, and 1 standard item. You do receive the recipe for the first unique weapon in the game, but the others you need to figure out for yourself. The converter is a great addition that allows you to craft very powerful weapons and of course change surplus items into something new. The main purpose of the converter is to craft unique weapons, but that is also its downfall. From what I've been able to figure out, only unique weapons can be crafted, and there is only 7 of them in total. This leaves the question of why can you only craft unique weapons and not armor, drones, helmets and implants too? There's no reason why it wouldn't be possible other than the fact that Sigma Team simply didn't put it in. Much like with the modifiers, what you get because of this is a great idea and mechanic that isn't utilised to its full potential. If they had a full catalogue of unique item recipes across all item types, it would give the player much more reason to experiment and play around with the converter all the more. Not to mention make it all the more rewarding and enjoyable. As it is, however, the converter is generally used for nothing more than changing 3 items into another, and not for the actual crafting of unique items, which defeats its primarily intended purpose. It's a cool idea, but one that is very much at the bare minimum of what it can be. Finally is the combat. Generally speaking, the combat to the Legend is pretty much everything you'd expect from the Alien shooter series. There are tons of enemies to kill and no shortage of over the top bloodbath action, so the Legend stays true to the series in that regard. However, with there being so many changes to the mechanics and workings of this title compared to the others, the combat has had some drastic changes. As previously mentioned, the character's movement has been greatly reduced at least at the start of the game, but the weapons and how they work too have had dramatic adjustments across the board. Changes that make what were once very powerful and enjoyable weapons to use in the series quite bland, and others more powerful than before. The biggest change without a doubt is the rate of fire with particular weapon types. Assault rifles and miniguns now fire at a much slower rate than they did in previous games, no doubt in an attempt to keep a balance between all the weapon types. While they have mostly succeeded in keeping a balance between all the weapon types, it has made some of the badass weapons of the series feel anything but it. Both assault rifles and miniguns shoot at a rate of 6 to 7 rounds per second, while with assault rifles that is acceptable, for miniguns not so much. As a returning player, I'm used to the miniguns ripping and tearing through hordes of aliens, but because of the adjustments, they don't do this anymore. The most powerful of the automatic weapons now are the SMGs, which fire at a rate of 16 to 18 rounds per second. Get your hands on one of those bad boys with some good modifiers on them and they'll rip through aliens faster than any assault rifle or minigun. The SMGs became my go-to weapon for over half of the game, and they served me far better than any assault rifle, shotgun, minigun or plasma weapon. Pistols now can be dual wielded and come in both single shot and automatic form. The latter is only available in the later stages of the game. In previous installments, pistols, even the most powerful of them, were still only fallback weapons, but with how the Legend is designed, they're just as capable of destruction as any other. Dual wielding pistols are probably the second, maybe the third most powerful of the weapon types, due to their high damage and high accuracy. I can go on all day with the number of adjustments and changes that have been made to the many weapon types in the game, but I think I've gotten the idea across of how the changes have affected the workings of the weapons. These changes, while they have negativities to them, particularly with the fact that fan favourite weapons are no longer as powerful, they come with positivities too. While indeed some of the weapons are less effective in this installment, the way it is designed results in no weapon type being any less effective than another. This results in the likes of pistols, no matter how far in the game you are, being almost as effective at massacring enemies as any other weapon is. You aren't restricted or forced to use specific weapon types because one is exceedingly more powerful than another. And while all weapons are equal in power, the different types do have advantages and disadvantages to them, making each type more effective than others in specific scenarios. For example, shotguns are very good at taking out small groups of weaker enemies. Pistols are great for targeting single stronger enemies, while rocket launchers are great for wiping out large groups of weaker enemies but come with a long reload time. So there is a certain level of tactics to the game, and having a varied selection available to you is advised, as you never know when a particular weapon type will come in handy. Another big change to the combat is that weapons no longer require the player to have ammo in their inventory. Instead, all weapons have unlimited ammo, but they do still need to be reloaded, with different weapons having varying reload times. I can't say I'm a massive fan of the fact that they've removed ammo and the different ammo types from the Legend. A part of preparing for a level and the tactics of the previous game was making sure you had enough ammo, and I feel it has lessened the experience slightly for it, as now you don't have to manage your ammo and you can just keep shooting with whatever weapon you want. Indeed, it keeps things simpler, but it lessens the depth ever so slightly compared to that of the original games. In its entirety, like with pretty much everything with the Legend, there has been progress made with the combat, but it is progress that isn't without its drawbacks. There's no denying that the classic alien shooter fun and action is still there, but there is an imbalance between all weapon types, and some of the most fun weapons from the previous games just aren't as enjoyable to use anymore. And the removal of requiring ammo has lessened the depth of the game a bit too. Newcomers to the series won't find much negativity to the combat apart from a slight imbalance between weapon types, but returning players will feel somewhat alienated and will have difficulty finding enjoyment with the changes, as it plays and acts very differently to what fans expect from the series. As a whole, the gameplay to Alien Shooter 2 The Legend is an absolute roller coaster ride. There's a lot to like about it, especially with how Sigma Team is finally bringing the series forward, but for every cool addition and change that is made, there are downfalls too. There are times where you'll be enjoying yourself and others where you'll be outright frustrated. The looter shooter inspired gameplay certainly works to a point, but getting rid of the RPG elements of the previous games is a missed opportunity for depth and something that would greatly annoy some fans. Look past the frustrations in some of the caveats, however, there is still classic alien shooter action and fun to be had, even if it takes time to reach it and the difficulty for the first while with getting absorbed into it. The Legends gameplay is a step in the right direction, but going slowly down the path of looter shooting may not have the best results for the series. I feel the path to success and progress with the Alien Shooter series is to start making it more of an action RPG. Bring the RPG elements back, keep the loot, shoulder cannon and crafting systems, albeit improve and build on them, while the general combat remains the same as it's always been. The Legend shows Sigma Team are already halfway there to turning the series into an action RPG, and while it has many problems, they have proved that they can make changes. But if the Alien Shooter series is to evolve where it needs to be, they need to get rid of the bad habits that have plagued their titles for years now. If you're at all familiar with Sigma Team's level design, you know exactly what to expect when it comes to the level design in the Legend. The only big change here is that levels are a lot shorter now compared to what they once were. Generally, a level will take no longer than a few minutes to complete, but you do get the occasional one that will take longer. The levels of the Legend are mostly the same as that of Alien Shooter 2, Alien Shooter 2 Conscription and Zombie Shooter 2. In fact, in most cases the levels are simply copied and pasted from those games. For example, in the magma base at the start of the game, you will still need to escort Engineer Nicholas. You will still need to go to the flooded basement and drain the water to restore power to the generator. You will also still have to deactivate the self-destruct sequence in the same way you did in Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance. You get the idea. Later in the game, particularly when you reach the city, you begin to see levels from Zombie Shooter 2 and even the extra levels that were introduced in their revised version, Alien Shooter 2 Reloaded. There has been a handful of new levels introduced, either that or I simply don't recall them, but for the most of the game, if you've played the previous installments, you will be playing the same levels again, or parts of them. Finding secrets was no problem, as I could recall most of them from previous titles. This has long been an issue with the shooter series. Sigma Team keeps reusing the same levels over and over again. Either that or they just make slight adjustments with a bit of cropping here and there. Again, like a lot of things with the Legend, to newcomers this won't be a problem, but to returning players, they will be replaying the same levels they have before yet again. There's nothing nostalgic about it, if that is what Sigma Team are hoping to achieve, and the action and new mechanics on their own don't bring so much enjoyment that the level design can be overlooked. Indeed, the game is fun thanks to the action, but the sense of deja vu is at times extremely overwhelming. The atmosphere to The Legend is the same as that of the other alien shooter titles. There is a mix between subtle horror and of course action with the atmosphere. During the occasional quieter moment where little is happening, a more horror theme comes into the atmosphere with a slow and subtle ambience track playing. It gives a sense that there's always something just around the corner that sooner or later is going to come and get you. But when something does happen, the horror theme changes into a complete and utter fast-paced action. A multi-genre soundtrack to go with the combat, comprising of a blend of bass heavy beats and metal that goes so well with the action. Sadly, returning players will once again be disappointed to find that the soundtrack is mostly the same as that of Alien Shooter 2 Vengeance, except for one additional action track called Dementia. Other than that, you'll be hearing the same music as you have for 2 previous games, if not 3, depending on if you played Reloaded or not. Despite the once again reused soundtrack and atmosphere, it nevertheless gets the job done. With it being so long since I played an Alien Shooter game, it is somewhat nostalgic to hear the soundtrack, but a few more than just one new track would have been nice. Once again, newcomers won't find too much of an issue with it, but returning players will find it quite exasperating once the nostalgia from the soundtrack wears off. Alien Shooter 2 The Legend has been a grueling game to review, not because it's an exceptionally bad game, as it isn't, but because there is so much to like and dislike about it all at the same time. I love the fact that it is a step in the right direction of moving the series forward, but I dislike the fact that it is such a minimal approach to doing so. Every cool new feature, system and mechanic that Sigma Team introduced into The Legend is the bare bone. The crafting system is a perfect example of this, as is the lack of modifiers for all equipment types. The yet again reuse of the same levels, plot, characters, enemies and soundtrack is nothing but exasperating at this point. And the new mechanics, while enjoyable and fun at least to a degree, tend to alienate fans of the previous games a bit. There is fun to be had with The Legend, the classic over-the-top adrenaline-filled action, even if it does take some time before it kicks off properly. And the new mechanics, while a bit bare bone and having drawbacks, still bring something fresh to the table. I can't say you'll be in for an awful time with The Legend, but it certainly isn't going to blow you away. And with that, I give Alien Shooter 2 The Legend a 5 out of 10. The Legend is a very small step into progression, and that gives me at least some sort of hope for the future of the Alien Shooter series. But this is the very last time Sigma Team can continue with their bad habits of using a now dated engine and the same assets and levels time and time again. If they are to release another Alien Shooter, it is going to have to be a true sequel with a new engine, brand new assets and plot. They're already halfway there to reinventing the series and bring it down the path they need to, but for the next installment, they're going to have to pull out all the stops. If they don't, the reception they will get will be far worse than what The Legend has been given.